Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to go through the questions that go with the end of topic weather revision lesson. I suggest you listen to my answers for each of the questions that you'll see in this document. After I've gone through each one, I would suggest you maybe try to write down the key points. Rather than writing them as I say them, listen to it and then see if you can then answer the question on your own without needing to listen to my instruction again. Okay, so let's start with this first question, which is describe the likely weather conditions in Manchester and Berlin. Well, let's have a look at Manchester. What have we got? Well, Manchester is sitting under a cold front. So the likely weather conditions we're going to get from a cold front will be heavy rain that comes with a cold front, and we're also going to get colder temperatures because the cold front always brings cold air. So that's two bits of information we know simply because Manchester lies right next to a cold front. What else do we know? Well, fronts are always associated with low pressure, and whilst the actual air pressure seems to be above what we would typically call an area of low pressure, we can see that Manchester lies relatively near this area of low pressure up here on our weather map. So what we would say is that the winds are going to be reasonably strong. We actually know that because the isobars are reasonably close together. I wouldn't say very strong. They'll be very strong up here near Iceland because they're very close together, but they're a bit further apart where Manchester is. So I would say that the wind will be reasonably strong. I would also say that because winds travel in an anti-clockwise directions, following the isobars, that your description of the wind direction will be that the winds are coming from the southwest. Remember, winds always follow the isobars in the direction of travel depending on whether you're high or low. So low pressure winds are always traveling in an anti-clockwise directions and following those isobars. Okay, so that's what we can say about Manchester. Let's have a little think about Berlin. Right, what's the likely weather in Berlin? Well, Berlin is over here in Central Europe, and it's in an area of high pressure, very high, 1028. So the temperature, there's going to be no rain. As a matter of fact, I would expect the skies to be clear because it's high pressure and the air is sinking. What else would I expect? Well, the temperatures are going to be probably reasonably high because it is September. We can see that up here in the weather map. And in September, in an area of high pressure, you're going to have quite high daytime temperatures. Although at night, it will be cold, much colder because there is no cloud to trap the heat. What do we say about winds? Well, we're right in the middle of an area of high pressure. So I would say very light winds because we're in the center of a high pressure area. So unlike low pressure, where you get very strong winds up here, if you're near the center of high pressure, you get very light winds. Now, the winds do the opposite in terms of the direction they travel. They do the opposite from low pressure. They travel in a clockwise direction. So they follow the isobars. So clockwise is this way. That's the way the clock hand turns. So the winds are following the isobars in a clockwise direction. So in Berlin, the winds are probably coming from the southwest also, although actually, because it's right in the middle of high pressure, it's possible that Berlin might actually have no wind at all. Okay? So no clouds, no rain, much warmer temperatures because we're in the center of high pressure. We might get a bit of dew on the ground in the morning because the air is sinking, and we get winds traveling in a clockwise direction. Right, that's the first question dealt with. Let's have a little look at the second question. So let me just rub that out. So the second question, by the way, what I do now is I would actually go to try to answer this first question. Second question requires you to know synoptic weather symbols, and you've got to be familiar with all of the meanings of the different symbols. I've gone with some quite easy ones to figure out, but you might need to know what drizzle means, what fog means, what would be the symbol for 6 octaves, and so on. This is a straightforward question because it's just asking you to describe the weather conditions in Manchester and Berlin. Describing is the key here. You're not being asked to give reasons. So Manchester has 8 octaves of cloud cover because it's fully circle colored in black. That means the entire sky is covered with cloud. There is rain. That's why we've got the single dot. We have a southwesterly wind. We have 2 full ticks, which means we have 20 knot winds. It's the same as basically saying 20 mile an hour winds. and we have a temperature of 12 degrees. In contrast, Berlin is much warmer. We have 1 octa of cloud cover. We have no winds. You have to actually say that. There's no stick coming out the side. So you actually have to say there is no winds at all and make that point. So that's Berlin covered, and that's us just describe the differences. The next question asks us to kind of combine our answer for the first question and the second question. So we are being asked to think about, why is there a difference between Manchester and Berlin? We've described the difference. We know what the difference is. Berlin is 7 degrees warmer. Berlin is dry. Berlin has no wind, whereas Manchester has rain. It's got 20-mile-an-hour winds coming from the southwest. It's colder. It's got 8 octas. Why the difference? What we therefore need to do here is we need to go back to this weather map, and that's where we get our answer. So the reason that Manchester has got rain, heavy rain, is because it's next to a cold front. The reason that Manchester has winds coming from the southwest is because the winds are traveling in an anti-clockwise direction, following the isobars in an area of low pressure. The reason it's got reasonably strong winds is the isobars are reasonably close together, indicating stronger winds. The reason it's got cloud cover is because it's next to a cold front, and cold fronts bring large cumulonimbus clouds, or you can just say very large rain clouds. Okay. And the temperature is much colder because colder temperatures come from cold fronts. It's in an area of cold air. So this area over here is all cold air. I shouldn't be using red because that suggests it's warm, but it's actually all cold air because it's behind the cold front. Right, in contrast, Berlin is much warmer because it's in an area of high pressure and it's September. Therefore, there's no clouds to block out the sun. Therefore, it's warmer. Berlin has no winds in this case because it's in an area of high pressure and there's very little in the way of wind in high pressure. There's no rain in Berlin because there are no weather fronts nearby. Okay. And that is me using my knowledge of synoptic weather maps to explain the differences in the weather. Specifically, when you think about the weather, you want to be thinking about rain, wind direction, wind speed, cloud cover, and temperature. So those are the 5 elements of the weather that you would be always looking to describe and explain for a location. Right, I would stop there and see if you can answer that pretty tough question, this one, explain the reasons. That's a very common question in the exam. You might just be asked to explain the reasons for the weather in one place. So why has Berlin got its weather, or why has Manchester got its weather? So all you'd be doing is telling me why the type of weather Berlin's going to have because it's high pressure, or the type of weather Manchester's likely to have because it's low pressure. And you also, in Manchester's case, you've got to bring in your knowledge of weather fronts as well as air pressure. Right, this question here, you've got to know what prolonged means. So prolonged just means having something that lasts a long time, so 2, 3, 4 weeks of the same weather, okay? And then what, in terms of describe how that would affect people. What would be the advantages and disadvantages? So all you've then got to know is, right, what is Berlin's weather? Well, Berlin is in an area of high pressure. So in this case, we are going to be discussing if an area had high pressure in late summer, in September, that lasted for a month. So what we're talking about is weather that's going to be sunny every day. It's going to be no rain every day. So think about the advantages and disadvantages of having weather was warm to hot every single day for a month, and when it didn't rain for a month. That will bring benefits to tourism, might be disadvantages to farming and business. You have to think about a number of different pros and cons of that. All right, just pause that and try to maybe answer what would you say? What would be your 4 or 5 things that Berlin is likely to suffer? You could do the same for Manchester if you want to practice. What would it be like if it rained, if we had cold fronts arriving every single day in Manchester for a month? How would that impact on businesses? And finally, let's have a look at our last question. So we've got, in this last question, I'm just going to rub that out there, origins and characteristics of 2 air masses. So the first part of that origin is where has it come from? So in this case, air mass A is coming from Africa. So its origin would be Africa, okay, or more specifically the Sahara Desert. Its characteristic is where you've got to tell me something about the air. Now, there's 2 elements to the air. We'd be talking about the moisture, and we'd be talking about how hot that air was. Now, because it's coming from Africa, it's tropical. It's a tropical continental air mass. So it's going to be very hot because it's coming from a tropical area. It's continental So it's going to be very dry because it's not passing over an ocean. So that would be the characteristics of that air mass: hot, dry weather coming from the Sahara Desert in Africa. Air mass B, in contrast, is a polar maritime. It's polar because it's coming from the top of the planet. It's maritime because it's coming over an ocean. Okay, in this case, it's coming from Greenland. That's its actual origin, and its typical characteristics would be it's much colder air because it's coming from a northern area, so the air temperature is going to be lower, and it's going to be very wet air because it's passing over an ocean, and therefore it's picking up water. So cold, wet air, that would be, you've got to know all 5 air masses potentially and tell me the type, their origins, and the type of weather they bring. Okay. There is the possibility in an exam to also get asked for the differences in temperature across the UK. So why is the south of England warmer, for example, than the north of Scotland? And you've got to explain a number of reasons that can affect the differences in temperatures across our island. Right, that's concluding the revision session. Go through each of these questions. Hopefully you've done them one by one and thought about each one and why you'll be writing an answer. And if you go through all of these, you will have prepared yourself for a number of questions or similar questions that you'd like to see in your end of topic assessment.